Good afternoon, everyone. I'm working to allow some of our participants into the meeting, and then I will get started here with everyone shortly with today's meeting. Hi, Kevin.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Doing well.
Good. All right, so it's 1 o'clock here in Jefferson County, so we will get started. Good afternoon to everyone again, and welcome to today's Superintendent's Advisory Council meeting. My name is Natasha Napier, and I serve as the liaison to this advisory group. Before I turn it over to Kevin to get us started with the meeting and our agenda, I do want to cover a couple of logistical items with you. One is that this meeting is being recorded, and then later on, that recording will be posted on KDE's website as well. And in addition to that, we are going to begin today's meeting with a roll call of members. It shouldn't take us too long here. We're a small-ish group. So if you are a member of the Superintendent's Advisory Council, when I say your name, if you don't mind, please unmute your mic, enable your camera, and then also respond once you hear your name. And I am going to go through names in alphabetical order based on last name. So again, unmute yourselves, enable your camera if you didn't call in, and you can use your camera and then respond once you hear your name. So I'm going to turn my camera off while I work through this process. But again, we want to hear from each of our members. So to begin, can we hear from Casey Allen, Superintendent Allen?
Casey Allen is here.
Thank you. Houston Barber.
Houston Barber, right here.
Robin Cochran.
Robin Cochran here.
Thank you. Kay Dixon. Alvin Garrison. Jerry Green. Scott Hawkins.
Here.
Thank you. Scott Howard. Mark Kopp.
I am here.
Thank you. Mike LaFavors.
Here.
Marty Polio. Terry Price.
Chelsea Tingle here for Terry Price.
Thank you, Chelsea. Matt Robbins.
Here.
David Rust.
Here.
Greg Schultz.
Present and accounted for.
Trace Settle.
Present.
And Henry Webb.
Here.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I inadvertently left off who's a member of the Superintendent's Advisory Council? And if so, please accept my apologies, first of all, but go ahead and chime in and let us know you're present.
Natasha, this is Tom Cochran, Johnson County. I think I'm on in place of Jerry Green.
All right. Thank you so much, Tom. All right, so thank you again to our superintendents who serve on this council. We certainly appreciate you, and we also appreciate our guests who are listening in today and our presenters as well. So again, thank you to everyone for your time. So on the screen is the agenda that we will be working with today. So we have several items to cover. And when I sent out the calendar invite to each of you, it did include a copy of the agenda and several guiding questions for consideration. And in addition to that, I posted or dropped that agenda in the chat feature of Microsoft Teams, so you can grab that from there if you would like it, or obviously it's here on the screen. So shortly, we're going to begin with a welcome from Interim Commissioner Kevin Brown. We'll hear from Angela McDonald with regards to school health update. Christy Hall and Misty Higgins will share information regarding re-entry guidance, teaching and learning stage 1. Hannah Paquette will talk to us about a needs sensing survey, and then we will round out our agenda with commentary from Associate Commissioners Dr. Kelly Foster and Robin Kinney relating to feedback from Superintendent Webcast. And then Kevin will adjourn us. So before we take a look at those planned items and hear from our presenters, I would like to stress that we do want to hear from you. We value your input. So please feel free to unmute yourselves at the end of any presentation when you have questions or comments. We want to hear from you. You can utilize the Teams chat feature if you prefer that method, or you can share your thoughts with KDE through an exit slip that we will provide you a link to at the end of this meeting. So again, we definitely want to hear from you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, to our interim commissioner, for the first agenda item and some opening remarks. Kevin?
Thank you, Natasha. I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for participating today. I know you have busy schedules, and we appreciate your attendance. I want to reiterate the importance of getting feedback from you. I know a portion of this obviously has to be hearing information from us and proposals and plans, and then but we also value your feedback. I know from just the makeup of this group, that's not going to be a problem. And again, just know that if you do choose to use the chat feature, the chat is memorialized, and that goes into our feedback, just as if you were to raise your hand on here and ask a question verbally. So just know you can use both of those we use both of those features, as well as the exit slip comments. So we use all three of those methods for being able to determine the feedback and the issues and concerns for all of our advisory groups. We're bringing you back every other week, and part of that is due to some comments I have received and feedback from your colleagues and some of you on this committee, advisory council, that the superintendents wanted more direct interaction with the commissioner and KDE staff, even though you are represented on the task force, on education continuation task force through your various representative groups, as well as there's a superintendent on there in her own capacity as superintendent. But we understand that, and so what we are doing, we have the education continuation task force meetings every other Monday. The Monday that the task force is not meeting, the superintendent's advisory council will be meeting. And so we will have that feedback either from the task force one week and superintendents the following week. Many of those agenda items will be the same or will evolve into each other, so that we're getting both the broader feedback from the task force and then specific feedback from superintendents from this meeting. And we think that's going to be until further notice, until we probably at least through my tenure as interim, through probably mid to late summer. And then obviously this is to address the unknowns of the pandemic, and my guess is that will likely continue in some form or fashion. At least that will be my recommendation, even if we ease up on the number of meetings on through the beginning of the next semester. So I just wanted you all to know what our thinking is. Again, we use those three methods that I mentioned through Microsoft Teams to gather input. We don't have these meetings just for show. Every week, if not on more frequently, the leadership team at the department and Karen Dodd's office, our Chief Performance Officer, helps us with this. We take that feedback and we have a feedback loop. And so we're hearing from the various advisory groups, the task force and others, about what are the issues, what are the problems, what are the barriers. And then we also use that to help populate new issues and a complete loop. So just know that this just doesn't go out into nowhere and we don't pay attention to it. We've really, I think, in the last few months, and as a result of the pandemic, have really honed our process for using feedback and making sure that it's informing what we do. So that's exactly what we're going to use this group for. And again, thank you for your participation. We have a very hefty agenda, so I'm going to stop talking so we can get into the important stuff. And we'll turn it back to you, Natasha.
All right, thank you so much, Kevin. So first up is Angela McDonald, and Angela will share information with the group related to a school health update. And her guiding question is there on the screen, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Angela.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm Angie McDonald. I am the Education School Nurse Consultant here at the Kentucky Department of Education. I'm the only nurse at KDE. So needless to say, I've had a very busy couple of months, just like the rest of you all have. I welcome the opportunity to get to speak to you today. I was hoping I would have a little more information to share along the guidance from the Department of Public Health, but that is still going through the approval process. And I hope you were able to listen in to the superintendent's call last week where Dr. White was able to discuss that. So I'm not going to go over that because nothing is finalized at this point. I would like to kind of tell you some of the behind the scene things that your school nurses are working on. I'm hearing some great conversations about how school nurses are being pulled to the table by their superintendents to help form their COVID-19 plan for the year. And that's exactly what needs to be happening. Your school nurse is your health professional in your district or in your school. So this is going to be a very daunting school year for them, as well as you all. But they are doing their best to be as prepared as possible. Many of your school nurses have been at it for quite a while and lived through the H1N1 outbreak that we had a few years back. And it compares nothing to COVID-19, but the basic principles remain the same. And we started meeting back in March, one about how to kind of close out the school year and the safest way to do it. But also I wanted to go on and plant seeds in their mind about things they needed to be thinking about for the upcoming school year. Using the flu plan as a basis to start thinking about what are things that you can do at your school to make it safer, to have a safe spot for students who may be exhibiting COVID-19 symptoms without exposing them to other students. How will they be supervised? What are little things that you could do to minimize the possibility that a student who is just coming for a daily medication, what can you do for him to get his medication and not possibly walk into the nurse's office full of children who are exhibiting COVID-19 symptoms? Those are little things that I asked them to go on and start thinking about. Also thinking about some of your more medically fragile students and their unique needs. Their best option may not be to come back to school, and if that's what the ARC decides for them, then as the school nurse, they need to be able to advocate to make sure that their health needs are being met while they're being educated in the safest environment possible. I've been able to share with them some wonderful resources from the National Association of School Nurses, as well as the National Association of State School Nurse Consultants. As some of the states' entry plans are starting to be published, I've encouraged them to kind of gently borrow from other states. If you see something that you think would work great for your school or school district, to please do so. I can't forget to mention the importance of working with your local health departments, and your school nurse and your health department contact will need to become best friends over this. They need to be at every conversation that you have in regards to COVID-19. And if you don't have a school nurse in your buildings, and I know money is very tight and it always is, but this of all times, our kids need school nurses now more than ever. So I would appreciate you just considering what options that you have, even if you can't afford a full-time nurse, a part-time, or an LPN, or even a nurse's very good trained and supervised nurse's aide could be a great asset to your school. Like I said, I don't have a lot of new stuff because I was hoping to talk more about the new guidelines, but we'll have to save that for another day, but I'm welcome to take any questions that anyone may have. Okay, if anyone does have any questions, just feel free to email me or put them in the chat box, and I will do my best to get you the answer that you need. Thank you so much, and thank you for supporting your school nurses and all that they do, and I hope you guys have a great school year.
Thank you so much, Angie. I know you have another commitment or another engagement to get to, but if we get any questions or if there are any on the exit slip, I'll be certain to pass those along to you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good day. All right, so next we have Krista Hall and Misty Higgins, who will be sharing information regarding re-entry guidance, teaching and learning stage 1. And again, their guiding question is listed there on the screen for you. And also that's included in your agenda that was emailed to you and also located in the chat feature of Microsoft Teams. So I'm going to turn it over to Krista and Misty to get us started.
Thank you, Natasha, and good afternoon. Recently, we hosted a 3-part webcast series around support for academic reentry guidance. And really the focus of this 3-part series was to provide guidance and a step-by-step process for teachers to be able to analyze what they were actually able to teach during the 1920 school year. And then with that, using that information to make informed decisions for the upcoming 2021 school year. Regardless of what the fall is going to look like, whether that's face-to-face or it's virtual or it's a hybrid model, or even if it changes once the school year starts, this work will be applicable to all of those situations. So I want to invite my colleague, Misty Higgins, to go into a little bit more depth to each of those sections to share with you all this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you all for having us on here today. And I know many of you have probably been on some of the other meetings where we've been sharing this information. So I just apologize to those of you that this might be a little bit of a repeat. One thing I do think is really important to point out about this particular guidance, you all have so many decisions to make right now, and we understand that, but the work of this guidance is actually for the teachers. So this is something we're really asking you to kind of hand over to the teachers, make them aware of this guidance, because the work of creating an adjusted curriculum for next school year is something that they would work through together in their grade level teams or in their course content team, whichever one it might be. And so the work of stage 1, like Krista was saying, it really involves 3 sections of work. And one of the things that we tried really hard to do in this particular guidance is to make sure that it is very specific, step by step, with all of the questions, all of the tables, all of the graphic organizers, everything that they would need to lead them through this process. The process itself, it's not easy work. It is kind of a heavy lift, but at least we do believe it's a process that's easy to follow in terms of what do we do first, what do we do next. So that first section of work that they would go through is where the grade level or the course content team, they're going to sit down and they're going to look at their curriculum from this school year, so the 1920 curriculum, and they are going to analyze that against the Kentucky Academic Standards document for whatever content area that they're looking at. And really the purpose is to see what do we absolutely have to keep in our curriculum next year in order for students to meet the grade level expectations. Because at the end of the day, they are going to have to carve out some room to be able to address the gaps that students may have from this year due to the extended remote learning. So they've got to really see what do we absolutely have to keep, what is necessary for us to teach next year for our students coming to us to meet those grade level expectations. And so as a result of Section A, they now have hopefully created time within their curriculum to add in gaps from this school year. The other thing I want to say about Section A, At the end of the day, as teachers, we all were in the classroom at some point. We all add to and enrich our curriculum every year. And in a normal academic year, we have the time and flexibility to do that. However, this is not a normal academic year, nor was the one that we just wrapped up. So it's going to cause us to make some adjustments. And so we may have to give up some of those things that we've loved adding into our curriculum each year. And it's not to say that teachers have to forever give that up. As they use the formative assessment process throughout next school year, they may find places to add back in some pieces that they're initially going to cut in this adjusted curriculum. But that's section A. What do we absolutely have to keep in order for students to meet grade level expectations next year? Now, section B is where the grade level team, they sit down together and they're going to look at, for the kids they had this year, where do they anticipate the gaps being within the content, concepts, and skills aligned to the standards for their grade level? Where do they anticipate those gaps being due to the extended remote learning? Because every year, every single year, kids will move on sometimes with gaps in one area or another. But this is a very unique situation where we will have kids, more kids than normal, coming in with gaps just because of the inequities that exist during that extended remote learning this spring. So it's, what do we feel are those areas where kids will have gaps? And then we're going to share that information through vertical conversations with the grade level above, so that they're not just playing kind of a guessing game of what we think kids are going to need, what they didn't get last year, what they may have gotten last year. They're going to have that information from the grade level below to say, for our incoming kids, this is where they anticipate the gaps being because of the extended remote learning. So then what they're going to do finally in section C is they take the piece from section A where they said, this is what we must keep in our curriculum this year in order for students to meet grade level expectations. They're going to take what they got from the grade level below in section B, where they anticipate kids having gaps due to the extended remote learning. They combine those two pieces together to create an adjusted curriculum for the 2021 school year. And again, it's not the easiest of work, but I think something that's important in what Krista said is that regardless of how we start school, teachers need to have an academic plan in place for how they're going to address both grade level standards and those gaps that students might have experienced. In addition, and we shared this in the last time we saw many of you all, is that in the updated guidance document, we did include considerations for leadership. So while the work of this guidance is for the teachers, it's really what are some ways that leadership can support teachers in doing this work? What are some of the things you might want to consider around that? So the very last page of the guidance document includes, for each section of the work, some considerations of how you might support teachers in that. And so, Krista, I'll turn it back over to you to see if they have any questions for us.
Yes, and as Misty said, we are not saying that this is easy work. You know, although we have tried to make the process very step by step and provide all of the graphic organizers to assist with this work, it's still a heavy lift. And so recognizing that this is the work for the teachers, allowing them to use their expertise around the Kentucky academic standards, around their content area and their curriculum, allows them to move forward as we are waiting for some more finalized decisions to be made. So if you have any questions for us, if you either want to unmute or add into the chat box, we will be more than happy to address those.
Just and before we get started, I'm getting some comments from some superintendents on my phone. I just want to make sure all the superintendents understand that we are going over some things that we went over on the superintendent webcast, but I want, just as the governor talked about how the Healthy at Work guidance has been changed almost daily because of how things change and the data changes. You know, we want to use feedback from you. This guidance, that some of the guidance that's already been issued, and a lot of it has not been issued yet, but you know, we are open to hearing issues, problems, concerns, not just questions, but and going back and changing the guidance that's already been issued. So that's why we're bringing it before you. And then there was a comment about just having an open discussion. We will do that during my closing at the end of the agenda, to have just kind of a open-ended discussion on concerns. I think some of that will come up in item number 5 on feedback from the superintendent webcast. But while we are on these agenda items, obviously want to take your questions, concerns, comments, barriers that you see, problems, while we have the subject matter experts here.
Thank you, Kevin. And we will hang on here until the end as well. So when that open discussion occurs, if there's anything that comes up, we can definitely address at that time as well. So Natasha, I believe can turn it back to you now. Natasha, if you're talking, you might be on mute.
I was talking away to myself. So I'm transitioning here to introduce Hannah Paquette from the Office of the Commissioner, and Hannah's going to share information with us regarding the needs sensing survey. So Hannah, I have your slides ready, and I'm happy to navigate through those upon command. So thank you for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Natasha. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for your time today. As Natasha mentioned, I'm Hannah, and I am a strategic data analyst in the Office of the Commissioner. And I wanted to share today a little bit about a project that we are undertaking and that you'll soon see coming out, which is our need sensing survey project. And there's a couple of things we wanted to kind of use this time for today, and that is one, to bring your awareness to the project because you'll be seeing these communications coming out, and then two, to also get your feedback on ways that we can really improve our response rates and get the best data that we can, which will allow us to plan and provide supports more effectively. So to just give you a sense of the project overview, the purpose of the survey work is to systematically learn about the needs that are occurring across the state due to the COVID crisis. And we also want to learn about how these needs occur in different segments of the education system and amongst different groups as well. It's important to note that these surveys will not be used for any kind of evaluation or compliance monitoring or anything like that. It is purely to help us understand and align the needs that we're seeing across the state and make sure that our perceptions of that need is what is actually being perceived by education stakeholders as well. So we are looking to be able to use this data to assist in aligning our work to needs and adjusting our work in ways that make sure that they meet the needs that are most pressing to various groups. And it will also help inform our work with partners as well. So as we see needs bubble up, we can, even more effectively engage partners to help in particular areas. The survey audiences themselves there are 4 groups. There's a superintendent survey, a principal survey, a teacher survey, and then a parent and family survey. And while there are many different kinds of education stakeholders that we absolutely value, due to time and resource constraints, we had to narrow it to these four groups. So that's sort of the overview of the surveys. You can go ahead and advance, Natasha, to the next slide. All right, so survey topics. The surveys are going to cover sort of these broad bucket areas, and they will obviously be tailored to the particular audiences. So for example, we have policy development and adjustment areas on our surveys. Obviously that will be for superintendents. We also have things like trauma-informed approaches and social emotional learning and supports, gathering needs information there in terms of professional development needs or knowledge acquisition needs, et cetera. We also have included information technology and distance learning categories too, to dig into what needs exist there. And we've also included assessments and diagnostic needs items, as well as those around family engagement and communication. And we're also including things like district and school planning and processes and things like that. So there's some big buckets that our survey items will drill into and provide us more detail about the nature of the needs, how they manifest themselves, and the severity level of those needs as well. You can go to the next slide for me, Natasha. Thanks. So we have the anticipated survey schedule just to give you a sense of when you're likely to see these things coming out. We are hoping that the superintendent survey and the teacher survey will come out this week and extend into next week for collection. The parent and family survey could come out this week, but it might be more into next week. So that will be coming along as well. And then the principal survey will be coming out in the following couple of weeks as well. So we're asking, first of all, when you see communications come out for these different surveys, that you could, if you could please respond to the superintendent survey for sure, to make sure that your feedback is received. And then also, if you could pass along these communications to the relevant stakeholders in your district, or if there's any other way that you can encourage folks to respond, to make sure that we have as many responses as we can from as many people as we can. That really helps us understand the diversity of need and what that looks like across the state. Go ahead to the next slide. All right, so that leads me to my last question. One of the things as we are looking for towards the dissemination of these surveys, we really want to make sure, as I said, that we have as many respondents as possible and that they represent as diverse an array as we can get, so that we can get the most representative feedback possible. And so to assist with this, we're looking for feedback from you about any particularly effective ways you can think of that to reach and communicate with these 4 stakeholder groups: superintendents, principals, teachers, and families, about these need sensing surveys, to make sure we garner the most effective feedback possible. So we're wondering about if there's any particular challenges that you see in either reaching these groups or even subgroups, different types of populations, or ways that we could consider pushing these surveys out to mitigate some of these challenges. So with that, I will pause and open it up for any feedback around how we might best communicate and circulate these surveys.
Hi, I'm David Russ from Campbell County, and I think most of us have social media outlets and also in-house email that we can utilize in order to reach many of these stakeholder groups. I think one way to also help to increase your return number of responses would be to put a question on there to say, what district do you represent? And then by making the data available back to individual districts, it also gives us more intent for skin in the game, because we're going to want some of that data. And if KDE was able to share back some disaggregated data to the districts as borne out by each district, it's going to be more meaningful for us to get that shared with our stakeholders, because all of us, quite frankly, are going to be in a situation where we're looking for the same need sensing survey, and rather than recreating the wheel, if you can generate that and then just have a drop-down box with the district represented and can disaggregate that information back out, then it gives us more of an incentive to make sure we reach those stakeholder groups to increase the response number. That's my thought.
Great, thank you so much, David. That's an excellent thought, and I'll definitely put that into the process. I think obviously adding a district question is totally doable, and then it is, I don't know, I think we have the capacity to do some district level and district specific reports too. So we'll add that in to the drafting process for sure. Thank you so much for that. Are there other thoughts on ways to increase response rates or reach people who we might otherwise have some challenges in reaching with the survey? If there are things that come to mind, particular communication channels or ways we can think about creatively reaching those that we really need to engage in this work, please feel free to either reach out or drop it in the chat or in the exit slip as well. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Natasha. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah, and also thank you, Superintendent Russ, for your thoughtful feedback regarding this topic. So next we have Dr. Kelly Foster from the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support, and Robin Kinney from the Office of Finance and Operations to discuss feedback from the Superintendent's webcast. And so I will turn it over to either of you to get us started.
This is Robin Kinney, and I'll get us started. I'm having just a bit of trouble seeing my. Okay, so we're going to actually talk about today's agenda item was feedback, and it still is feedback. We're soliciting feedback from superintendents, but we're going to narrow our scope just a little bit to talk about instruction, funding, and attendance. This is an issue that we rightfully keep hearing from superintendents that they'd like to know more about. If we'll remember back to what, as we were trying to wind down the school year and trying to think how we were going to actually look at SEEK funding going forward, Senate Bill 177 came into being and really helped us with a time of uncertainty as we finished that school year. And thank you to you and all your finance officers who have informed us of your selection of data that you would like to use using either 1819 or 1920 data. I can share with you that we had 14 districts that chose to use the 1920 data. So not a large number, but 14 districts that felt that was a better opportunity for their district. I can also share with you that most of those districts were smaller districts. And we only had, I think, 2 county districts. The rest were independent. So I can share that with you at this point. But of course, that helped us really to finalize what data would look like as we head into the next school year. And as we think about funding and what that looks like, we will go through our normal processes like we always do relative to SEEK and calculations. So looking forward into the fall where we will get property assessment information and we'll roll forward in that path. So we kind of, Senate Bill 177 really helped us take away some of that uncertainty, or at least degrees of uncertainty, as we look to funding for this upcoming school year. Of course, the next thing, and as school district staff and superintendents know, is, you know, at any given time, really superintendents and districts are thinking at various points in time when they're thinking about their funding. And we're looking backwards, we're looking at the present, and then we're looking forward. So in order for you all to have a better understanding of what your funding may look like for the next school year, it's important for us to talk about how we do attendance in the school year that's coming up, because for funding purposes and data, as you know, we're always looking a year behind us. Very important discussion that we're having now, even though it does seem a little further away. Next slide, please, Natasha, and we'll get started. So we are going to talk about instruction, funding, and attendance for school year 2021. And looking forward into how that then impacts funding for the next year as well. Next slide, please. As we have talked here at KDE and have also looked at and sought information from superintendents and finance officers who I appreciate very much calling and talking through their concerns, we've looked, we understand that with instruction, you all are making those difficult decisions right now in trying to determine the model of what your school will look like for instruction for next year. And some of those models would be in person. You could have remote learning, or you could have a blended of the two. And I think there are even some other ones out there that districts are kind of rolling around and thinking what might be best. Always, as you think of instruction, your goals include you're always trying to deliver quality instruction, and you're thinking about opportunity and access to make sure all your students have ways to be actively engaged, and your teachers can deliver that quality instruction to them. And you're also thinking about flexibility this year, because we don't have a full appreciation of what's going to happen, and you need to be very flexible in your ability to deliver that instruction to your students. Next slide, please. So we see that when we talk about attendance and funding and try to come up with some goals based upon what we are hearing from local school districts and also internally to KDE, we came up with some things that kept repeating as we listened to concerns. And I'll just share some of those with you and hope you may be able to also add some other things that we need to think about as goals. Temporary. We are in a pandemic. We all believe that at some point this will end. And so we're really thinking about attendance for the school year coming up, starting in the fall of 2020, and how that might impact funding for the next year. So it's difficult to do this, but we think it would be very challenging to think about permanent changes in the situation we're in right now. So we're leaning toward a more temporary nature of how do we get through the next school year and impact the funding for the subsequent school year. We've heard that it needs to be explainable. So whatever we would come up with together, we need to have the ability to be able to explain it to our coworkers, to people in the district that work with attendance and funding, to families, to constituents. We need to be able to explain it. We need to be flexible. This model, whatever we would come up with, it has to be flexible enough that it can really sustain through the whole school year, thinking about what the different changes that school districts may have to make as far as attendance and instruction. It needs to be very flexible. It needs to be predictable to the point that it's not exact, but it needs to be predictable so that districts have some degree of ability to determine what funding would look like based upon whatever model is come up with. It needs to be verifiable, meaning that we are looking to be able to, from an audit perspective, you would be able to say attendance in person or remote. You ought to be able to verify that it actually attendance actually occurred. And ultimately, I think our primary goal overall is we don't create anything that would either incentivize or discourage districts from making decisions about their model that they come up with. In other words, we want districts to have that ability to make good decisions, the best decisions for their students, for their families, for their constituents, and for their staff, and not get caught up in trying to pick a model because it would reward or discourage on the funding side. Next slide, please. So when we think about funding and the tie to attendance, because right now we know that attendance, either based upon half day or whole day, really informs the average daily attendance, and that's the model that we use right now toward funding. So we do have students right now that in our traditional model, kids come to school and you either get credit for either a half day or a whole day attendance for those students. We also have performance-based funding, which is based upon more performance-based work where a student completes certain work and you get attendance based upon the successful completion of that work, and it's not as focused on a point in time. That model really creates the situation where funding occurs after the fact and after that performance is finished. And then we also have non-traditional instruction, and we know that in the former use of non-traditional instruction, it was for a short period of time, 10 days, not more than 10 days, and we relied upon a participation type count that then influenced attendance and then guided you back to an ADA from the prior year. The other things that we've heard very clearly that need to be considered are transportation, and especially as it links right now, or maybe a better way to say it, it doesn't really link right now to that non-traditional instruction and remote learning. And then finally, growth, trying to make sure that we consider growth in certain districts as they enter into the next school year if they have more students that are actually coming to their districts. Next slide, please. And finally, I'll just share with you from a logistics standpoint, and very purposely put this at the end of the presentation because all those other things that I've gone through very quickly, of course, are goals and things that really drive our decisions. But from a logistics standpoint on whatever is to be implemented, I can share with you that Infinite Campus is already working with Kentucky as well as other states about different ways to maybe take attendance. So those discussions are underway. Training would still have to occur if we come up with a model that is very different than what we have now. So we would have to think about how we educate and train staff that work with attendance, as well as if there are components that will require a different look at attendance or how you would collect attendance, that would have to be trained down into the local school districts. And of course, anytime you try something different in a short period of time, you do have concerns about the validity of data and how accurate you can really be. And then finally, I would note that SAR and SEEK, our attendance system and our funding system, are fairly, they are not the newest in their technology as far as just the systems themselves. And so if there were required, based upon the model, changes to be made in those systems, we would have to pursue those very quickly and would have to explore the level to which those could be done. For the current school year, and thinking about how we have kind of pivoted with the selection of districts choosing different models, we are actually doing a lot of that manually. So we will have to do some manual adjustment for districts for this school year. And then looking forward, if manual adjustments would have to be made, that would take, of course, time and effort. So next slide, please. So that's where I've ended, and I've really just set forth these high level goals for us to then have good discussion about. I think our guiding question was, what is the top priority that you may feel? But I would encourage us to think for today's discussion, really, as we go through the different considerations for how we would handle attendance and funding and instruction going forward as it impacts the next school year. What are the top things that KDE should consider from the perspective of local school district superintendents? So I'm going to stop there, and surely we will have some input on this discussion. This is a really hot topic. So I already see something in the chat from Greg Schultz. I understand and agree with all of the concerns that you have mentioned. When will decisions be made at the state in regards to attendance funding for alternate instruction approaches so that we can realistic plan for the fall? So I think that's part of the reason that we're in front of you today, is to help you all inform those decisions. We need to really hear from superintendents about, if you have considered, if you were sitting in our shoes, what feedback would you give us on what approach we should take so that we can meet as many of these goals as I've kind of outlined today.
And Rob, and I can add to that. You know, the goal is to have, and we've been talking about this for about 3 to 4 weeks. The goal is to have an executive order or other type of document that does memorialize some of these decisions around mid-June, which we're almost there. That's our goal. Some of it may take a waiver from the state board, but some of what Robin is talking about that we will need to do to temporarily adjust some of these attendance issues will likely need to come from an executive order through the governor's emergency powers, like we did through and waived the civics exam, for example. There's a process for that. Some of it may just take a standalone executive order because the General Assembly will not be in session before we need this. So the goal is to give you an answer around mid-June, assuming we can get get feedback and get to a place where we think most of you are comfortable with what we would memorialize through either a waiver from the state board and or through executive orders.
Hey, Robin, thanks for kind of outlining some things. I wasn't sure on your blended model, but as we have begun to try to plan for next year, and I think a lot of districts will be in this situation, we're going to have a fair percentage of students who, for whatever reason, are not going to return to school when we can resume. Mm-hmm. And I think many of us will be faced with running basically a dual system, 2 systems simultaneously, where you have a percentage of your kids at home doing virtual work and you'll have a percentage of students in class, in person. And so I'm not sure how the attendance would work when you're running two systems simultaneously, but I think that has to be part of the end product in terms of how we can best understand that. But I do think that's going to be an issue that we all face, because as we have surveyed folks so far, there is a percentage of people who won't come back.
Thank you, Superintendent Hawkins. We have considered that. We know that that is a very realistic possibility, if not a probability, that you'll have lots of families and students for very reasonable reasons that choose not to come back to the school district. So to be in person, let's say not to come through the classroom doors. So we do think that, our current model really envisions that in person sitting in a seat, and you will have kids sitting in a seat. They'll just be at their home rather than in your school building. So whatever attendance model, we would have to come up, we'd have to think about what would that look like and how would we take quote attendance? How would that work over a long period of time? So that is definitely on our radar for further discussion. I also see David Rust has put in the chat box, and I'm going to try to go back up to it real quickly. He's basically asking if there have been any discussions with the General Assembly leadership about ADM. So that's looking at membership. Sticking to ADA is holding our creativity back. So, of course, with membership, I think the other caveat that we would give overall is we would have to do some thoughtful consideration about moving to a membership model and really not trying to create a shortfall right off the bat. So, and maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't do that, but I think that's the one thing that's kind of a thought in the back of our heads about membership. Would that moving to that model create a situation where we need more dollars, we don't have those more dollars, so in essence that just has to, we have to reallocate the funds that we already have in a different way. So, but that is one consideration that is still being talked about.
And I also think that's a broader discussion I think that we need to have with the General Assembly, but I think we'll take General Assembly action for that. What our goal is, and what the charge I have for Robin and her team, is to give us a temporary solution that districts can utilize next semester and probably throughout the next year. But particularly next semester, since the General Assembly won't be meeting, that will allow you to easily count students you are educating, but they are simply seated at home. And then you have other students who are seated at their classroom in their desk as they normally would. The current statutes and regs don't visualize half sitting at home or a third sitting at home and 2/3 sitting at school. And that's what we want to do temporarily. And that really doesn't bring into membership as much as that's more of an overall policy discussion if we move there as a state, but simply would adjust some definitions and some procedures around that you can count Sally sitting at home in your attendance count for the next semester. That's where we want to be, because we know the hybrid model is going to probably likely be utilized.
I think we had a hand raised. Superintendent Barber, I think your hand was raised.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Just a question. As school districts continue to build models for reentry, with some districts, and I'm not even talking about blended, but going in and out of different types of models, how will that attendance potentially work? And so, for example, if we went like to a 4-day week and then off 6 days and then 4 and 6, I know that sounds really strange, but just from a quarantine perspective, I don't know. I mean, we're just kind of exploring everything's on the table.
That as we went through our models, we know that there are other districts out there like yours, Superintendent Barber, that are looking at very creative models. And so we think, when we think about it, and this is a good discussion to have, because we're trying to come up with some type of system that really takes care of 172 school districts, trying to think of what it would look like, but still give that maximum flexibility for you to choose what you need to have done. I think the attendance and how we collect it is a really interesting discussion. Excuse me. So many are talking about a blended model, trying to come up with this way to capture attendance. Under the way we operate right now, it is either full day or half day. And so my staff and I have been exploring, well, how big of an impact is half day from a funding, and how many dollars we have, and how would that look if we looked at kind of that data and said, well, maybe it would be easier to just come up with a once a day check, instead of a twice a day, especially for those remote learners. We see some challenges, and I appreciate hearing some from superintendents about what that would look like as far as your staff's obligations when you've got remote learners and them trying to make sure they are capturing attendance. If any superintendent has already, had those discussions with how that might look in your district, that would be really helpful for us to hear. I'm going to go on to the next while you all think about that and what that might look like. I do see.
Sorry, Robin, I was muted. I wanted to ask a question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
And mine's not on attendance, but it's about reopening. And so talking about, what Scott Hawkins mentioned about a lot of families are going to select a virtual type academy if that's offered in a district. In my district, I sense that as well. And I mean, there's two different concepts that could play out. One is that we have not quite 3,000 kids. So if you had 30 kids who opted into the virtual academy, that's not a big deal. We could figure that out. Probably wouldn't even change structurally how we do things. But if we had 300, 400, 500, I think Scott was saying the percentage of parents in his survey was extremely high that said they would prefer the virtual option next year. So we need some kind of guidance or leniency in terms of SBDM allocations, so that, you can imagine if we have district-wide 50 first graders selecting the virtual option, it's hard for 3 different elementary schools to serve them, but it might be actually easier if you just created a separate virtual academy. So just depending on how the numbers turn out, we need some flexibility there. And of course, right now we don't have that with the staffing allocation formula.
That is a really good comment. I don't know if I'm sure our SBDM staff have already thought about that, but I will take that back and we'll add that to our list of things to be thinking about. I appreciate that comment very much. I see another comment in the chat from Superintendent Robbins, and would it be possible to hold harmless again with 1819 ADA and utilizing a separate methodology for growth districts? Growth seems to be less likely given the COVID-19 period. I will share with you that has been something that we have discussed at the department, and it does have, it's attractive from the point that we wouldn't have to really go into the level of attendance for funding purposes. I guess the thing that we continue to discuss, because attendance does tie to funding right now, what separate things might need to be put in place to make sure that instruction is still moving forward, that connections with students, the participation elements, how would we, if we took that kind of away from being tied directly to the funding, how would we ensure that that continues from a district perspective? Does anyone have any ideas? Because we've talked about that a lot. In fact, we've talked about whatever districts chose for this school year coming up, either 1819 or 1920, to just kind of push that forward one more year. And we do see that it has some benefits as an attractive maybe solution, at least initially, from the perspective that it has a level of predictability. It's easy to explain, and I think, you know, it gives districts almost that place to start from at least. And so it does seem to check a lot of the boxes. David Rust has also, Superintendent Rust, in the chat box, worried about transportation. We will likely need the same routes with fewer students riding, particularly in the rural area. Loss of transportation dollars as it's currently calculated. How about routes and miles, regardless of the number of students transported, at least for now? I think if we get into a situation where we're really trying to do pieces of this, that is certainly a consideration. For transportation, it is possible that you could end up with the same number of routes with fewer students riding. With that, pushing forward that 1819, 1920 model would hold that steady again. So that does seem to be an attractive feature again for transportation.
Hey, Robin, just a quick thought, and this may not even be feasible. I just think, given the unknowns on how we may have to deal with closures throughout the year, if there were to be cases where we had to shut down, or for whatever reason, we maybe not a 9-week closure, but it may be a week or 2 weeks. Has there been a thought that we would not utilize the requirement for the number of days again this year and simply go to hours? And could attendance be calculated on hours as opposed to days? So you get away from the half day, whole day thought process and maybe just look at hours. I don't know if that's doable or not, but that may be an option to at least consider, with the unknowns on what we may face before we can, get back to just normal every kid in school.
We have had lots of questions about contract days and instructional hours, and just instructional days. So I think at this point, we were leaning toward continuing to require those instructional days and hours. That's not to say that we might get into a school year either at the very beginning or as we roll along, and we might see a spike and have to do things similar to what we did this past school year. So contract days and hours are absolutely a part of the continuing discussion. I see another comment from Superintendent Robbins. Rather than trying to fund directly, do you see the academic requirements districts are required to measure as a condition of funding? I think, if we separate the two and really focus on sort of that, trying to create a hold harmless for a year, I think there will still be questions about instruction and how do we make sure that instruction is happening. And I will say, very humbly, I am not the best person to speak to the instruction side. That's why I rely upon my other colleagues here. But I think we all recognize that, at least traditionally, the thinking was, coming into the schoolhouse and having a student sitting in a seat in the schoolhouse gave the teacher the best opportunity to deliver instruction and for that student to receive instruction. I think as we've gone to a remote learning, we see children that are doing a really good job remotely. But we also have to acknowledge that we have kids that aren't going to fare as well in that remote environment and will require some additional efforts on behalf of districts and teachers. So how do we make sure that those populations or groups get that extra effort and are receiving the instruction that they really need? So I think we can separate them, but I think all those important questions remain. Okay.
I would add to Superintendent Hawkins' question about the 170 days. It's a delicate balance when we're trying to do an executive order, knowing that the ultimate decision maker on policy, of course, is the General Assembly. And so we know the 170 days is in statute. We know the General Assembly will be coming in December. We know we'll have a better idea in December or coming in January. We'll know we'll have a better idea in January and February about whether or not meeting 170 days is going to be problematic. So I just wanted to clue you in on a little bit of the thinking here behind the scenes of what to include and what not to include in the executive order to try to balance that out, giving deference to the General Assembly, knowing that may not be a decision we need to reach right away. However, we also know that it would be helpful probably for you all to know whether 170 days would be required or not. So from the beginning and for planning purposes. So just know that that's part of our thought process and trying to reach that balance in what to put in an executive order and then what to then defer to the General Assembly, knowing that they will be in session from January to April.
If I could ask superintendents if there's anything that we just haven't thought about or haven't talked about that we need to have kind of with us as we make decisions moving forward together. If you could include that in the chat box just to make sure that we are thinking about the things that you're thinking about. I would also share with you that my office, Office of Finance and Operations, we are hosting regular phone calls or webcasts with your district finance officers and also with your DPPs. And of course, they are rightfully very concerned about whatever model we're going to use. They want to support you. They want to support you well and to give you good advice. So we are having those conversations and soliciting input from both finance officers and DPPs on regular calls. I've had the opportunity to talk to some of the finance officers, and they tend to lean towards something that is, of course, more predictable, and so that they can help you manage your budgets going forward. I think the other wild card, I would call it, in all this is really what revenues are going to do overall. And, we have been listening at both the state level and the national level of the kind of bleak outlook for revenues, especially as we start the new school year. And so anything that we come up with, of course, would be subject to change based upon revenue receipts as they come in. So I think it's just trying to come up with sort of like a base, a starting point, and really appreciate the comments that you've provided here today. And also, if you have anything that you'd just like to talk one off with me, I'd be happy to talk to you by telephone. Or again, if you continue to put anything in the chat room that would help us keep in front of us the things that we need to consider.
Robin, I would just like to say that, so much of what we do is contractual in nature, and I know you're aware of this. And so when we talk about funding, I have several instructional positions right now that I have on hold. I'm not filling because I'm not sure what next year looks like. So that's just, we're legislatively bound in so many ways that once somebody's under contract, we own them for a year. So looking at a hold harmless is appealing in that regard, because at least, again, we have numbers that we can budget upon instead of waiting to see what attendance looks like. And as Scott said, if you look at the preliminary data coming out of Ohio, I think there was a survey given there, 40% of parents, 40% said that they wouldn't send their kids back to school. Now that was 3 weeks ago, so that may change, but this is just something that has me concerned, because we could get in the middle of the year next year and we're back in the NTI situation. We're looking at what to do with our bus drivers, what to do with some food service staff, even instructional assistants. And so if we have them under contract, obviously we'll be expected to pay them. So we need the funding.
All excellent points. The uncertainty on so many fronts is, if we just had uncertainty in one topic, it'd be one thing, but it really does cut across everything you do from an operations standpoint and from an instructional standpoint. So anything that we can do that would kind of give some level of predictability even to a portion of what you're what you're dealing with. I think that is our goal, so that you can focus on all the other things that are really still uncertain. So appreciate those comments. You're absolutely right. Once contracts are engaged, of course, contracts are there for a reason, and so that your staff has that level of certainty as well. So do appreciate those comments. Absolutely correct. Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, I at some point feel a little better about this conversation because at least we have all been kind of thinking about the same things. That's not to say that we have resolution or answers yet, but it is at least reassuring from my standpoint that we are hearing that we all have similar questions, concerns, and issues that we're trying to tackle at the same time. So thank you very much for your input. And Natasha, I think it comes back to you.
It sure does. Thank you so much, Robin. We appreciate the wealth of knowledge that you always share with us. Commissioner Brown, I'm going to turn it back over to you for open discussion and final thoughts as we work to conclude our meeting today.
Thank you. I will just open it up for just general discussion. I will give you an update of kind of where we are. We are, if you remember, we have a list of about 8 to 10 guidance documents that in a series that we anticipate and have already started issuing some that you remember the first guidance document with the questions to ask your community and talking about developing your district committee and reopening plan. And then all the way until June 29th, we have various guidance documents. One you heard about today, about related to reopening, but we are awaiting some guidance from Department of Public Health. You all were on those webcasts where we had Dr. Stack on there. They heard concerns from the superintendents. The public health went back to kind of hone some of their guidance, particularly around transportation. As I understand it, that document is being finalized and is being reviewed by the governor's office. And so some of the guidance documents that KDE has that are in addition to the public health guidance, and some of the public health guidance will be woven into the other guidance documents. That's why those are on hold, in particular the transportation document. For example, we have a transportation guidance document from KDE that talks about how to wipe down buses and services, but then that's some of that content's being originated at KDE, but then a lot of the content that you're interested in about how many kids can be on a bus, et cetera, and what do you need, how do you do that, has to be authored and approved by public health. So we're working on weaving those together. So we're hopeful that this week those will be able to be updated and sent out as soon as we get final authorization from the governor's office and public health. So stay tuned for that. And then I think we have a hand raised, Superintendent Schultz. I think you may be muted.
You are correct. Sorry, sir. You think I'd get used to this after about 3 months. But anyway, my question is about on the guidance coming from public health. Will we have some chance to push on that a little bit? I feel like when we pushed on the bus situation, they rethought that a little bit. My concern is obviously, I know we were talking about a lot of kids that may choose not to come back, but if we're forced to only allow half our student body in at a time, that may be a complete non-doable for many of us. And so I'm just wondering, will we have a chance to have dialogue before that gets made public? Because once it's get made public, I'm afraid my public will take some maybe offense to that.
I think everyone's trying to balance the need to get guidance out there based on the data that we have now and the trend of the virus, so districts can make planning decisions while knowing that the guidance can be updated at any time based on changing circumstances. And I know that doesn't make it easy, because if something changes, but that's what's happened with the Healthy at Work, and that's why you hear the governor talk about employers needing to check the guidance daily, because there have been many changes to the Healthy at Work as the situation with the virus changes, as situations in neighboring states changes. And then as I understand it, they've also gotten some feedback as things have been implemented about things that may be working or not working. So I think the answer to your question is yes, but it may be after the initial guidance is released. And to the extent that the guidance is not ready yet, by tomorrow, then we're going to be at, and I think we will have we are going to have public health on the, Robin, correct me, and Kelly if I'm wrong, tomorrow public health individuals, at least 2 of them will be on the superintendent webcast. So, and the document from public health may or may not be released by then. So my guess is it won't be released by then if we haven't seen it yet. So in that aspect, you will continue to be able to have guidance. You just won't, maybe not have a draft document to see yet, but we hope that they will comment on what's in the final document. Kelly and Robin, am I correct?
You're correct. And I would also say that, in our collaboration with public health, that's what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to give feedback as former teachers, principals, district office level staff. We've had folks around the table that have had all those roles in a school district to try to think about transportation, food service, instructional pieces, because nothing against public health, but they're not school people. So that's what we've been trying to do at the table with them, to say, hey, this really isn't going to work. That's not what it looks like in a school. So we've been trying to provide that feedback and have been successful in getting some things changed. So hopefully we'll be able to keep that collaboration moving forward with them and get that guidance to a point that is a little bit more user friendly for K-12 education.
Kevin, I think one thing that might help is that if the guidance had a certain level of flexibility from the very beginning, as opposed to being, when it first came out on the bus situation. I mean, it was pretty well hard line. You can have one kid every other seat, and then because there was no flexibility, then the whole document basically had to be redone in terms of what they would allow. And I think where Greg is going, at least I think, and kind of where I would be going is, particularly with the social distance within a classroom, what level of flexibility do we have with that? If kids are in mask and the classroom could hold 15 kids socially distanced, could we still have 18? Could we still have 20? Is there any wiggle room with that to give us, I think, a better opportunity to plan? And I think that's the struggle, is that when you have some hard line numbers, it may or may not work out with the students who want to return, or the way that you could plan accordingly. So if the guidance could be written with a level of flexibility, I think that would be extremely helpful for all of us.
Understand. Good point. And I know Kelly and Robin have that they understand that perspective. I think that's we've been hearing that along the way. So we will make sure that we continue to reiterate that to them, and we also encourage you to reiterate that to them tomorrow on the call.
Kevin's Matt Robbins here, and I'm just tagging on to what Scott and Greg have said there. But and I don't know if the public health has school personnel that's involved with assisting them with drafting these plans or not. But I just can see where, based on the lens that you look at things, you're going to come at it in 2 different ways, if that makes sense. And I just think from the practical nature of, every step, literally from the bus to entering the school, to classroom, to eating, then to dismissal for the day, all those things have to be considered. And I had concerns a week ago Tuesday with what I viewed. Maybe we'll look at a completely different document, but I think there's the school practitioner side of this and the health practitioner side of it, but those 2 have to be married together. And if they're not, I think I think we run the risk of producing a promulgation of how we open school that has a lot of holes in it if it's done prematurely. That's my question comment.
And I'm not saying that this makes it right or wrong or easier or any easier, but I can tell you we continue to gauge what we're hearing from Kentucky Public Health with what other states are doing, and it is almost to a sentence in line with what other states are doing. That doesn't make it any less frustrating. I do believe the public health folks in all the states are coming from this from a similar and same angle. And so we are paying attention to what's going on in other states. And as I've said before, we're involved with SREB, particularly because we know that, you know, there's some level of sameness in similar circumstances that southern states have culturally and otherwise. And so I think the SREB work that we're doing with Southern Region Education Board, as you all know, led by Dr. Pruitt, they're issuing a playbook on various reopening scenarios. And we are helping inform that, but it's largely being driven by members of the task force that are school district superintendents as well as building level administrators from around the South. Kelly, can you give an update as to when some of those items from, because you're on the task force with me, will be coming online from SREB?
I was just now looking on their webpage. I feel like sooner than later, but I'm looking to see if they had some draft documents published, but I don't think anything final has been released by them yet. I will tell you that this afternoon, our alternative learning model guidance will be coming out, and that will be highlighted tomorrow on the superintendent's webcast by Dr. Marty Park out of Office of Education Technology. And it addresses many of the things that you all have mentioned today as far as, you know, what it looks like to have a blended learning model or to have some students virtual at home while other students there in the classroom. But I will try to find out for sure when something's going to be released from SREB, and we can announce it tomorrow during the webcast.
I will add in our involvement with the SREB task force, for example, they have some really good guidance out there talking about how to message to your community about welcoming students and families to school and assuring them that certain practices are going to be in place, such as hand washing protocols and hand sanitizer and all that. And that's obviously a really good thing to know. But I brought up on the call that some of the things that we're hearing from you all about how that guidance also needs to talk about how do you message to parents who are saying, no, we have no problem sending our children to school, but we are also not going to put masks on them. And that's many of you have described that to me as a cultural issue. And I'm experiencing that here where I live at our farm. I go to the dollar store several times a week at night, and I'm the only one with the mask on, except the two employees, and I'm sure they've been told by Dollar General they have to. And I looked like I'm kind of out of place, and people look at me, even though that's what we're expected to do. I know you all have similar experiences, but when I go to Lexington, and there's a little bit of a difference there, majority of people I'm seeing there in various retail establishments have masks on. So there's a difference around the state. We know you all are already grappling with that and what to do with that. So we encourage SREB. We know that's going to be a problem in other states as well, that we need to be able to know how to address that cultural issue. And I've also brought that to the attention of our public health officials as well as the governor's office as some important feedback that we're hearing from you. As you all know, your community's best.
Kevin, just a quick update. If you go to SREB's webpage, they have draft guidance available on governance and operations and health and safety. And once those documents are final, we'll be uploading those to the KDE, or to the non-KDE guidance documents.
Commissioner Brown, this is Danny Atkins from Floyd County. And I did want to share the same information that you had just mentioned. I mean, the feedback I'm getting from the folks here, the parents here in Floyd County, is they're ready to go back to school, but they're not going back to school with masks. And and I know we need to follow guidance as much as possible, but that's just the feedback I'm getting. I know it's nothing new that you've not heard, but still, I wanted to share that bit of information.
Thank you. Anything else? This has been very helpful. Go ahead.
Commissioner Brown, late last week, there was, I guess, some confusion, I'll call it, surrounding districts that were looking at the August 26th start that's has some forgiveness in the statute with days and hours. It actually goes to hours. And I don't know if this reached you or not, but the confusion surrounded not the student requirements, in terms of attendance, but the confusion surrounded, let's say, teachers in this instance, whereby you could only take, let's say it's 165 days, to use easy math here. You could only add 15 days to that to get to a teacher contract of 180 days, where most of us are at minimum 185 contracted. And like I said, there's a lot of confusion around that. I'm wondering if that's something that you have heard about to this point, and if there's any clarity on that subject that might be gained.
Sure. I think you're talking about if districts, whether they intentionally do so or not, are in the area of the taking advantage of the boat dock bill, meaning you start school after a certain date in August, and then
That's
it triggers some benefits for districts and calendar waivers. Todd or Robin, I believe you all dealt with that issue last week. Can you all, either of you, comment or both?
This is Robin. I'll start, and then I'll let Todd correct me where I mess up if I do. So yeah, the boat dock bill does afford the ability that if you start after the certain day in August, that it removes your requirement for the instructional days of 170. And then it also talks about how that proportionately impacts certain other issues in your school districts. One of which it talks about contract employees. And so Todd and I were actually talking about this last week, and we believe, and I'm going to defer to him on the legal interpretation, but what that means is, let's take the 165-day example that you gave. Instead of having to hit that 170, you do not have to hit the 170, but any contractual days you have above and beyond the 170, you still are obligated to meet. So, Todd, are you on the line? You might want to weigh in further.
I don't see him on here. I think he had another call, but that is consistent with what I remember reading from Todd, and I think he was answering a question from another superintendent, the same question.
Can I just add an illustration to that might help me a little bit more here? So obviously we're beyond the 170 days. Certainly we've got holidays and so forth that would be included with that. If you have a teacher doing professional learning on one of those days, that's a contract day, or if you have maybe a teacher or teachers doing interventions, academic interventions with students, all meaningful work. The way I understand what you're saying is that as long as we're providing the meaningful work up to a teacher's full contract, that's acceptable.
Are you talking about for this current school year?
Yes, for next school year.
Or for next school year?
For next school year. As a for instance, we'll probably have as many as 10 what would have been instructional days that now would be professional learning, certainly prep for virtual learning, using some of that time to do academic interventions with students. I guess my saying is I can't pay people for doing nothing. Obviously, we know that the laws, I have a moral and a legal problem with that. However, as long as we're providing meaningful work, we can continue to contract them for the full amount of contract days that they otherwise would be provided. Is a question.
That's my understanding, but I don't, Robin, and we maybe want to get Todd to clarify that just in case that statutory language has some weird language in it that could say otherwise.
I think maybe something's getting lost in the interpretation, perhaps. I don't know, but it was stated last week that you could only work teachers, regardless if you had them contracted for 186 days, you could only work them for, say, 180 days. And so we saw all kinds of pitfalls or issues with that. So
we'll get that clarified. Jennifer, if you'll mark that down for clarification and address that at the first thing, or Karen, if you can do that, mark that down to address on the first part of the question and answer session on tomorrow's webcast.
Got it.
All right, anything else? We have the exit form posted there in the chat feature. I'm reading through some of the other, so make sure you check out the exit form. It's simple and easy to fill out. We've learned that is also a valuable way for us to gain feedback on both the content and the format of the meeting, but also anything you may have forgotten to indicate verbally or through the chat, and we take a look at that, and that factors in and is included in our feedback. So as is the chat, which is archived. So I want to thank everyone for this. We will see you on the superintendent webcast tomorrow. Another full agenda. This has been great feedback for us. And then, of course, we will have another superintendent advisory council 2 weeks from today, which is the 22nd. Thanks, everyone. And Natasha, did you have any other, did I close it out okay? Or
That's right.
Sorry.
I was just going to reference the exit slip, and the next meeting is June 22nd. So you got it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Thanks.